welcome everyone who's joining us. I know it's a little bit early on the West Coast for sure, since both of us are here, and a little bit late for the European folks. So we appreciate anyone who has joined. So our today's topic is preventing non-compliant data sharing to marketing partners. Um, and again, as I said, welcome everyone. This topic is kind of interesting because in the US, we've seen at least the focus of regulators or even the way some of the regulations were formed and overall evolved were around first selling and then even sharing, which is basically all marketing advertising. The enforcements are also related to that. FTC especially focuses on that as well. And while my thinking was maybe it's a US only problem, like recently over the last few enforcements that have happened in Europe, they're all because of pixel leaks, pixel breaches. And yeah, we'll speak about a little bit about the canal guidance. It talks a lot about mobile apps and SDKs, which is all about marketing as well. So that's what the topic is about. A few housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded. So in case, you have something you want to note, you'll always get the recording after the webinar. There is a Q&A option at the bottom of the panel. So feel free to use it at any point of time. While this is a structured webinar, we will stop and answer your questions. If there's something you feel is relevant to us then and there, feel free to do that. We'll also take questions towards the end. Nik has an amazing experience of implementing technologies and helping companies comply and figuring out, the known unknowns. And so, yeah, feel free to direct questions to Nik or me, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. With that, I'll kickstart the webinar. I'll introduce myself. Hey, everyone, I'm Vaibhav. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado.ai. Prior to starting Privado, I feel everyone has an interesting journey to privacy. I was in product management, and I worked with my legal team to help them comply with GDPR back in the day, or collaborated with them. Privado, and so that was my idea about Privado. Privado is a product privacy management tool. We scan the software products your company's product and engineering teams are building. So think of mobile app, website, all the APIs that support that. And we help you get visibility into what data you collect, share, and process, automate privacy by design, and do real-time consent monitoring of your website and mobile apps as well. With that, I'll hand over to Nik, who I've had the pleasure of meeting in IPP and also knowing him for a while. Nik, over to you for your introduction.
Thanks, V. Thanks everyone for making time today. My name's Nik Fuller. I lead a consulting company called FLLR Consulting, and we really focus on how do you operationalize privacy programs through technology. And this came about through my background. I spent 5 years at a little privacy software company called OneTrust, early employee there, got to build and lead the implementation team. All the Walmarts of the world, they were my customers, and had the opportunity to implement, deploy technology in these programs from GDPR to CCPA and beyond. Did a stint in some of the big consulting firms where I was a senior manager. And as we looked at the market, we identified there's a lot of firms that do privacy with a little technology, but we really felt there's a need and a gap in this market to be focused specialists in privacy technology. So where we see the market's going, we see a lot of privacy programs looking to automate. So being able to understand what is a pixel, how is data shared, how do you automate consent requests and DSAR automation, that's our focus. And that's where we look to help operationalize privacy programs for chief privacy officers across the world. So excited for the conversation today.
Thanks, Nik. And I feel the same. I see that's where, a big gap in the marketplace is as well. We've, of course, spoken about the laws, and there has been quite a bit of enforcement and guidance over the years. And now it's about taking that guidance and making it part and making privacy business as usual. And that happens through technology, processes, and, implementing. So yeah, I feel the same. Cool. So what's on today's agenda? A couple of things. We'll first start with enforcement trends. I mean, that kind of drives privacy, at least, the case for privacy internally, although there are non-enforcement reasons as well. But we look at what the trends are in US, Europe, and especially how they intersect with these marketing or advertising use case. We'll look at some non-compliance examples. These are just for references. Honestly, like, we don't want to pick on any company. It's every company has some challenges, and some of them get fined, some of them don't get fined. So it's a question of, in my opinion, if not, when, kind of. Then we look at the marketing data sharing landscape itself. We will go into the at least a high level technology overview of what is the surface area that through which marketing data flows start and where they end up. So at least you have a simple checklist after this webinar on going and talking to few key people in your company to say, hey, what are you doing marketing wise? And then we'll end with a quick overview of Privado. If we have time, I'll do like a 5-minute demo and like what the key offering is as well. Again, throughout the webinar, feel free to put questions in the Q&A section, and we'll pick it up as the conversation goes.
I have the chat up right now, so I'll monitor it while we go through.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks for that, Nick. Yeah, great. So I think what I really wanted to kick the conversation with, Nick, was just the enforcement trend that we see in Europe and US. And I added the last one, as you can see, is the September 2025 one. But I wanted to get your perspective as you work with your customers, and even from the maybe some of the IPP panels. What are you seeing in the US or Europe from the marketing perspective or the enforcement perspective?
I think the biggest trend is awareness, right? We're moving out of a phase where all these compliance issues are a legal and privacy problem, and we're starting to see more stakeholders with inside organizations become aware of their legal obligations, of the requirements that the company needs to follow. And they're looking to be good stewards of the business. And when we talk to marketing, more often than not, they want to help. They want to do things the right way. They want to be compliant while still, maximizing their use cases. And so we're starting to see more of a partnership. I think the enforcement taking place, you get in a headline. Obviously, no one wants to be in a headline, but we're starting to see much more of a partnership. Both sides of the table, marketing and privacy legal, come together to build programs to look to operationalize and to drive more education to marketers around what they can do, what they should be thinking about, and how do they operationalize this over time.
Yeah, makes sense. I think from my perspective, like just trend wise, what I've seen is like the first phase post GDPR was putting up the banners like constantly, like, hey, we need a consent banner. That was the first probably collaboration between privacy and web analytics or marketing team, teams who own these digital properties. And I think the recent enforcements are the second opportunity where I think it'll become a more almost like where marketing expects privacy to give them tools to self-govern, right? It's like, hey, our mandate is to maximize revenue. So we are going to retarget, remarket, which is a legitimate business use case. But while we do that, help us figure out when we go on the wrong path so we don't do that, right? Because, you can't say like an intern switched off a tag and, that's the reason for a for a fine. They need those they need those supporting tools. As they make any mistakes, they can be corrected, right? So that's, I think, one thing I've seen. So going from just putting up a banner to putting up like privacy, putting up something which is monitoring the banner and saying, hey, we realize there is a capability in our marketing team to switch on a pixel or tag whenever they want. So we are going to have something to monitor that to prevent any non-compliance on our digital properties. So that's been the case on enforcement for sure. I think the second one is around mobile app. I think that's pretty interesting. I think there were two things that come to my mind. One is California, the AG's around a children's app or specifically on app developers. And the whole focus is around SDKs, or a big portion of that was SDKs. We're still analyzing the as you can see, like the mobile app guidance from CNEL, but even they have a big focus on SDKs. And the second is they're going to start enforcements next year, right? So right now the guidance is published. It's like for companies, at least the opportunity, if you operate in Europe and maybe if you have France presence, then for sure something to look would be for mobile app, similar how you've looked at your websites and seeing having an SDK inventory, doing that governance, because regulators are now going to look and audit your mobile app as they audited the websites as well.
I think you're absolutely right. Mobile app is such a big trend for our clients today, and it's often overlooked, right? The websites are so front and center, and we may engage with a client and how many websites do you have? We have 23 websites. How many mobile apps do you have? Good question. And you open up the App Store and you say, you have 7 mobile apps. Did you know that? Like, oh, I knew I had 3 of those. I thought they deprecated one of them, and 2 more. I didn't know it went online yet. And then we ask, well, are you doing anything to govern these SDKs? And SDKs in a mobile app is very similar to like a cookie on a website. So they're collecting data, they're sharing data. Often there's a Facebook SDK there, and if you see that on a website, that obviously perk your ears up if you're a privacy pro. But how do you get visibility into what's in the mobile apps and what's changing? Because it's such a evolving landscape, and yes, there's more and more enforcement coming out here. So for us, there's a big focus on how do you drive compliance, awareness, and monitoring inside of these mobile applications.
Yeah, and to your point, like these SDKs are like pixels and cookies, but the biggest challenge I see is like you can go to a website, open like a tool like Ghostry, and it'll say, "Hey, here are 5 trackers." There's nothing like which a privacy professional can audit using their own phone. So that's why they need collaboration with you and us on like where we have the technology to like surface that visibility. Here are your SDKs. Here are the data flows to that SDK. So mobile app is challenging because you cannot, like you can feel it, but you will never know what happens underneath. You can't follow, you can't click a bunch of buttons and say, hey, the Facebook SDK got triggered. Like maybe Ghostly can help you on a website, right? Or Apple also shows the trackers in some sense. Um, there were a bunch of questions that came around. So there's a question on, and maybe Nick, you can also tactfully answer that because you work in the consent side. So the question is around Google Advanced Consent Mode. And then the regulators aren't focusing on it that much. Or yeah, what's your opinion overall?
Yeah, I think for Google Consent Mode, it's a lot of conversation. Clients trying to understand, does this apply to us? How do we take advantage of it? How does it cooperate with our cookie banners? Is it duplicative? Is it complementary to it? I think if I'm a betting man, we'll start to see um, more focus on that over the next 6 to 12 months, just how we saw a trend in GPC compliance. And I think we'll start to see, at least we'll want to document why or why not we're taking advantage of those capabilities. And it's not just, Google Tag Manager or Google that has these capabilities, other kind of deployment methods do as well. So partnering with the marketing team, partnering with your view on what kind of data we collect, really informs whether or not you should use something like Google Consent Mode. So if you are a covered entity or you're collecting PHI, maybe under a BAA, is that your data? Is it your the health provider's data that you're acting on behalf? And should we making decisions based on that with Google Consent Mode? Maybe, maybe not. But that's generally comes to a legal point of view. But if you're maybe pure B2B and you're not collecting a lot of information, it might be an easy way to kind of manage consent a little cleaner.
Yeah, I feel the same because like Privado has a functionality on consent monitoring. Nick, you've used that, and we would scan websites where we would detect calls to Google, and then it would be in the advanced consent mode. And that's then the risk appetite for the business. Like, that's an issue that we will flag for sure, saying, hey, we see calls going to Google, but under the consent mode, what they're saying is like, hey, we're not actually sharing whatever PII, so this is actually fine. But that's where, as you mentioned, it's actually that's the line that the privacy team has to decide if that's okay or not. And you can always block it and not use the advanced consent mode, or you can document and say, no, actually, this is fine unless the regulation says otherwise or the enforcement says otherwise. So I do think that's a little bit of gray area, as the question was also asking. But, that's, as you said, like if your health, maybe not do it. But if you are like a B2B company, maybe it's fine. So yeah, that's the risk appetite conversation that teams will have internally.
Well, the biggest thing there too, V, is are we using it, right? And that's what privacy teams are trying to understand. What are we doing on our sites? And what stops, I love marketing, but what stops them from clicking a button and turning it on and making you aware that something has changed? So this ongoing monitoring and partnership is so critical because now there's a lot more buttons, and options that someone can just turn on without you being notified.
Yeah, I agree. Which brings us to the next point, which is like examples, right? These are all like it's not about picking up on a specific company, but it's more about like what went wrong so that you can improve your program internally, right? And to your point, what in my view has happened is uh technology has made marketing sophisticated and democratized, which means people have like in the older days, you had to like work with an engineer, and that would take 4 to 6 weeks before you could actually add some stuff, or maybe 2 weeks, right? Now it's like they've added a platform in your website and mobile app, which can do things on the fly. You can switch a button there and that could change things. So that's the democratization. That means you can start marketing campaigns faster, but that brings in the risk. So you need the guardrails as well. So I would say like few interesting like examples that we can look at is, of course, pixel governance. That was the probably the topic over the last year. SDKs being a big topic as well. And I think data flows is another big pain point as a trend that I've seen. Like, what's the actual data that the pixel gets versus just, hey, the pixel is compliant, someone accepts, but you still don't want health data to flow to the pixel or the SDK. I see these three as a big problem. And US, it's I think FTC takes a very consumer focus. Like, what did you promise the consumer? What are you really doing? And that's the challenge. But around these three marketing technologies is where I see the biggest enforcements around. Nick, do you have any point of view or what you've seen in the market?
Yeah, clients are asking us about this. We're asking them, what are they doing here? I think something you mentioned is what is that data flow? Because it's not just about who's collecting this information. What are the third parties that can they then get triggered downstream when that data gets collected? Because it may not be obvious that, hey, this pixel or this cookie also now brings 5 other pixels and cookies onto the website. So being able to understand and highlight what that data flow is, that downstream impact to this data collection, because now we're talking about third party, fourth parties. Do we have proper agreements in place here? Where are our data sharing language, or do we have DPAs with these vendors on our sites to make this possible? So now it starts to highlight a broader ecosystem that we've not been able to see before, and it's kind of I'll make up a term, it's a shadow third party or fourth party we didn't know about because everything's so dynamic on the web today. And so being able to build out these flows so we can now interpret this. Now we know what's in place and now we can take action. But a lot of orgs just don't know. And so they can't take action because they're just unaware of what's happening.
Yeah, makes sense. And I like to borrow like always from security, right? So because the threat is like super fast. So like they've been speaking about supply chain weaknesses, and White House is publishing it on like, hey, what's the supply chain looking like, and do you have a software bill of material on what
Yeah.
supply chain you are bringing and what your software brings the next supply chain on, right? So I think privacy is similar because, as you said, you can have like an advertising partner, which at any point of time can bring in more. And that's dynamic. That's not going to be governed by a contract. That's going to happen on your website. And that's the risk for which you need to monitor. So yeah, completely agreed there. So with that, I actually wanted to take a step back and say, hey, if you look at just marketing or advertising data flows, as companies are focusing on retargeting or advertising efforts, how does data really flow out? And what are the key properties they can actually go back and just speak to a few people today, and at least even if they note it in Excel, what are the things they need to focus on, right? Uh, so I see a few, and Nick, feel free to put in your opinion as well. So I've put like some like one third party logo, not picking on that, but we'll look at it as a trend. Um, so websites, I think that's probably the most famous property, digital property that every privacy professional look at. I think that's for sure where you have your pixels, trackers, and data flows. Mobile apps. So we feel is the next trend. That's where you have the SDKs and SDK governance program now standing up. And I think the one piece which is additional to this, which is tag managers and customer data platforms. So tag manager would be Helium, Google Tag Manager and such, and customer data platform are Segment, there is mParticle, there is HighTouch, there are a bunch. And these are like three, and we'll go into each one of them. But Nik, I just wanted to get your opinion on how do you see the data flowing from marketing stack?
Yeah, I think those are the big three here. The next trend, and the trend's already here. So if your marketing team is not using a CDP today, they will. Vendors are calling them every day. They're building business cases. It's going to happen. And so being able to understand what those CDPs are collecting and how they're analyzing that information. A good trend or a good example is we're working with a quick serve restaurant and helping them enable cross-domain and cross-device consent. So you have your website, they have a loyalty program on the website. They also have a mobile app, so you can place an order, you can get rewards when you go to the restaurant. Well, when someone opts out on the website, how does that pass down to the mobile app? Share that GPC signal, those consent signals. Well, they're also sharing those signals to their CDP, their data platform, which is going to analyze it and then determine what action should take next on that site for that consumer based on the consent that's been given. And so being able to, these are not isolated problems you solve by themselves. We need to think about this as the holistic tech landscape and say, what's my website doing? What's different about that, my mobile app? How are they sharing data? How's that data passed to the back end? What tags are then triggered from something like Segment, or sorry, from like a Google Tag Manager? And then what is my CDP collecting about that consumer? And how are we giving them targeted and unique marketing channels that they can go through? So being able to understand and at least be aware of what the marketing team is doing will help a lot of privacy professionals ask better questions as we start to wrap our hands around what this data lifecycle looks like or data flow.
Yeah, and just to double down on a couple of these three key or the challenges in each one of these buckets. Again, like as I said, if you go back today and not engage with Nik or me in Privado, and you just want to say, okay, tell me I want to build something in an Excel sheet. Three things that you should definitely target: website, mobile app, customer data platform, and we'll go through each one of them. And I would say, actually, I would add not just the customer data platform, the tag manager on the customer data and the customer data platform. So we'll go with each one of them and focus on what are the compliance issues on each, and Nik will share some journey on how he's seen that implement, right? So maybe let's start with the one that is the most kind of unknown to privacy teams, is the customer data platform. You might have run assessments on them. They might have come to you through our third-party risk management tool, but think of like a CDP or customer data platform like Segment or HighTouch or any of those as like a low code, no code platform where almost all of your customer data comes in. And then the marketing team and it already has a list of connectors on one side, right? So you have your first party data coming in from the left, and on the right is all these pre-built connectors to Meta, all the advertising partners you can think of. And the platform really allows marketing team to write some logic to say, hey, whenever a user hits this condition, create a bucket, and every day sync this data to the trade desk or wherever they want to send that data. And there is no governance in the sense that that's like completely out. Nobody, that's their day to day. Someone will manage that and they can just keep doing that, and it's completely up to them. So that's what a CDP enables. It gives them, without creating a ticket for an engineer to write code or for a product manager to prioritize it in the sprint. They can just do that today. They can just switch on a vendor and the data can start flowing through your CDP of your first party data, of your consumer data, loyalty program data there. I wonder, Nik, like what are the challenges you've seen or visibility gaps you've seen around that?
Yeah, I think first I'll say, look, I love marketing. I want them to market, to advertise. I want them to make money for the business. So I'm not a guy who's like, let's shut it all down. Privacy, we're not sharing any data. That's not my point of view here. Like, businesses need to make money and marketers have jobs to do. I think the main thing here is, how is this working inside the organization? Do we know what those third parties we are sharing data with? So what are those connectors that's plugged into? What are these journeys marketers are trying to take our customers through? How do we enable them to do that more effectively by collecting consent and capturing it, recording it, to understand where all these different third parties on our site? Maybe we can actually simplify that and push it more through a CDP as opposed to on the site directly. We can actually put more governance around this, which streamlines and enables a lot of these processes. Because oftentimes you'll find, you can probably ask any privacy pro. We went on the website and we asked someone, what does this cookie do? And no one could tell us because it got put there a few years ago. We're probably not even using that vendor anymore. Just never went off the website. And so this opens up the opportunity to put more governance, and maybe a CDP is a better place to share data through rather than on the site. And now we can simplify all these different interaction points that we need to manage and govern here.
I agree. I mean, and that's what we've seen, like the rise of CDP is to like empower marketers so they can actually make easier decision without disrupting other. And that's like an opportunity for privacy as well, where they can reduce a lot of pixels on their website where you don't really have once the pixel is added, you don't really have control on what data flows, because by default they collect data, right? By default, they'll collect the page button clicked or the page visited, which for a health company could reveal health data, which is what happened in a lot of cases. With CDP, you have better control because you are writing the logic of what data goes from your customer data platform to a pixel to meta ads, for example. Um, yeah, but at the same time, you need that visibility, because sometimes the marketing team, they can still create a profile saying, hey, whoever bought, this drug in the last 30 days, let's target them for whatever, ABC. And that could be a legitimate marketing use case, and they might not have the privacy context, and that's where you can empower them. So that's the CDP world, that segment high touch of the world. So something to go back to your marketing team and ask if they use that, and then you need to build governance around it. I would say let's pick mobile app as the next, because that's the next less familiar territory, and we'll go to website towards the end. So what are you seeing on mobile app? I know you touched there's very little governance, but what are the kind of risks that mobile app presents to as privacy risk to the companies, and how teams can solve for that?
Yeah, I think three things jump out here on mobile apps for me. One, when we say a mobile app, hey, do you have a mobile app? Yes. Well, what platform is it? iOS and Android? Maybe someone's got a Windows app out there, I don't know. But you're really now doubling the amount of apps that you need to monitor and govern, right? Just because I have one app, but I have two platforms, it's two different tech stacks, two different set of SDKs and APIs that could be called into it. They could be built very differently depending on the organization. So it's not just thinking of, hey, we do this once in say iOS and it covers Android. No, there are different implementations that you need to manage. So take the number of mobile apps you think you have, probably multiply by 2. That's the number that you need to govern. And that also includes the number that you need to be aware of changes to. So anytime someone makes an update to the app, are they collecting more information? Are they adding new SDKs? How do we get plugged in at the code level to see those changes are versus after it hits the App Store and it's going to take 3 weeks to publish a change to get approved by Apple to actually go through? How do we see that before it actually goes out the door here? And then the last piece around mobile apps is within an app, you have the SDKs, but they can also call APIs out into other ecosystems that can pull data back into the app that can share it out. So we want to be able to have a better view into how data flows across the app within and internally and externally within the app. And that gives us this big point of view on where our risk is, what do we do well, what do we need to govern more, how do we manage these changes more effectively?
Awesome. No, that makes complete sense. And that's kind of the big headline coming up from both the California AG and the Canal is about monitoring compliance across the application development lifecycle, especially because, as you pointed out, if you have an active privacy issue in your mobile app, it is going to take 3 weeks to 4 weeks to fix it. It's not like a website where you can, like, if something is broken, you can fix it and the next hour it gets published. I mean, it's not like if you get all the resources, you can really fix the website. But in mobile app, you can't really do that. You have to wait for the approvals to kick in. And even then the rollout happens slowly, right? So like some people will be on the last version with the, so that makes mobile app, I think, the more riskier and still more challenging because your risk will, your active breach or active data leak will take weeks to fix, if not months for sure.
Even your fix could be rejected, so it could not even make it to the App Store because it didn't meet some guideline that someone in the App Store set, and there's no phone to call them. There's no phone number to say, please approve this, right? So for me, and what we talk to our clients about is how do we catch these before they go out the door? Some of this you can monitor on a website and it's reactive. How do we get more proactive with this? How do we provide notice and awareness to our developers? Hey, looks like you're collecting more information. Are you sure? Have we done a PIA on this? Well, if you're going to do that, make sure these controls are in place to manage it. And that's where we can move from a reactive kind of organization to proactive in privacy here.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks for that, Nick. And yeah, I think websites, and this is the most common thing. That's where I think I would imagine the first thing people do is to start with the website and say, let's put a cookie banner, let's set up a privacy policy, notices and all. So I think this is pretty well known, but the things that are changing or are very dynamics are these tag managers, are these pixels. And I think if there's one thing that you need to have governance around beyond adding a consent banner is consent monitoring. So making sure, are you testing your consent banner independently, saying it actually works, it shows up, it doesn't have a dark pattern. If someone rejects cookies, the cookies get rejected. If someone rejects consent, advertising calls don't go. Is TPC signal being adhered to or not? So on and so forth. I think those are more important question as well. Yeah, so there's a question. I think, Nick, you've worked around consent implementation a bit. So if you can answer on cross-platform attribution, combining data and appropriate consent, etc.
Yeah, I think there's probably two parts to that. You have a known user flow and an unknown user, right? If it's unknown, there's tools that are doing that attribution behind the scenes to say, hey, we think this is the same person on the website as the mobile app for whatever reason. Maybe same IP address, coming from a similar location, similar kind of user data. How are we combining that and ensuring consent's in place? I think it comes to what notice are we providing to the consumer first and foremost? What do we tell them we're doing with that data in the form of a privacy policy or whatever notice we're presenting in front of them? So they know their rights and we're being transparent on what that data is being used for. How do we, if we are making that attribution and connecting those accounts, how do we give that consumer the ability to revoke consent, right? So being able to have cross-domain consent, cross-device consent. And so something updates on the website, it gets pulled out from the mobile app and vice versa, and give them the ability to opt back in. I just don't want to take it away. I want to, collect it again if I have that opportunity. So we need to provide those capabilities to those consumers. I think first are we giving proper notice about what we're doing with that data? And then it becomes a technical item to drive the attribution and ensure the different platforms and devices are connected.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, Nick, for that. And I see that trend going up with all the platform requirements on the mobile app side, and then also, of course, the regulators guidance as well. So yeah, just combining all of this, I think overall marketing governance, ad tech governance, digital tracking governance, we see as a big theme for privacy teams to focus on. And one area where they would need to kind of spend a little bit more time on. So it's something, you're trying to set this up. This could be like a nice program to summarize it. Marketing governance, ad tech governance, digital tracking governance. And as, Nick said, marketing is really there to increase revenue of the business. So they're going to do all these. They're going to measure campaigns, retarget user, target similar users, and that brings in revenue. Privacy's job is to make it in such a way that they can do all of that, but not bring any privacy risk. And that's the governance that you can set up around digital tracking, ad tech governance, or marketing governance, however you call them. So we just wanted to put a word to it so you can, build it as part of your program and have those conversations internally. I don't know, Nick, if you have any insights or opinion around it.
No, I think this is spot on. I think we're probably building the same PowerPoints because we talk about digital governance inside of these organizations. It's not just web governance, it's just not mobile app. It's a digital governance program. It starts with how do we inventory? What do we do? What's there today? What do our policies say? And how are we sharing this data downstream? Then it's how does data flow? And is it as we expected? Are there any leaks here that we need to resolve? And then it comes to monitoring this. So how do we keep track of any changes before they go out? How do we monitor any live changes on the site? Get notice and awareness so we can action on these activities. So for us, it's just a digital governance problem. It spans all sorts of platforms. Think of CTV, connected devices. All these are collecting and sharing data. So it goes beyond just tracking and into an entire governance program here.
I agree, and that's probably and we're working on like synthesizing the FTC white paper on streaming, and of course social media was always the case, but just streaming like expands it to a lot more companies, and there's focus on vehicle data collection. All of that is basically around like, hey, if you have something where users are interacting, do you really know what you're collecting, where it flows, essentially.
Yeah, and I think 90% of this, all these updates are really happening at the code level. And so being able to evaluate and understand what is actually taking place from an engineering point of view, you don't need to be an engineer to go, understand how it's written, but to be able to bubble that up and say, oh, this is what's in my app, and this is where that data is going, and these systems are calling it and pulling these different attributes through an API, and now it's leaving our org. That's good to know, and then you can take action on it. So being able to get to that level, I think, is just so important, especially I think we're moving into this new world of governance within privacy, and now we need to be more proactive and have these operation centers to do a lot of this monitoring and maintenance.
Makes sense. And that puts into the last section of the webinar, which is the Privado solution overview. And I'm going to pick on, how Nick kind of explained it. So Privado is a product/software scanning solution. We actually have both proactive scanning, which is think of the code that an engineer writes for a mobile app or a website they're actually writing all the logic of what data they're going to collect, what the SDKs are going to be, what the data flows are going to be. So Privado scans that software code, that mobile app, that website, that CTV, that vehicle app code to build you what data you collect, who you share it with externally and internally. That's proactive, so you can actually fix things before they go bad. Then we also have a reactive scanner, which is it simulates the website and the app to say what's really happening dynamically. As we were touching on, you have a lot of tag managers and CDPs on your digital properties, which have control to add more fourth parties, fifth parties. So the reactive part is to give you insurance against the dynamic nature, and proactive is to fix things. So you don't have to wait for 6 weeks to fix a privacy breach. So we're going to talk about that. I know there's a question. No, actually, this is probably even a good segue on, and then I can jump into the Privado solution. Who's the ultimate owner of this digital tracking governance? Nick, what are you seeing? Is it privacy? Is it marketing? Is it like combined? What's happening?
Yeah, I think it's a shared responsibility. Ultimately, setting up the governance framework is probably from a compliance point of view. Maybe that is under a data governance org. Maybe that falls under the privacy or legal. Maybe it's a pure compliance team. So what are the governance requirements? What are the policies, procedures? What are the laws we need to comply with? they set up that framework. And then you have, if we think of a RACI, who's responsible for this? So the accountable party is the governance team, that privacy, legal, compliance. Then who's responsible for making sure this is in actioning? Well, that goes to your engineers, that goes to your marketing team, and they follow the governance policies that are put in place. And then you bring that full circle, and now you have a functioning governance program. It's not realistic to say, hey, my privacy department of one is now a full governance team, and if they don't have any technology, nothing is enabled here. It's going to be an uphill battle. But if we can bring in different stakeholders there, enable them with technology, enable them with policies of what they can and cannot do, now you can decide and determine, is this working? Is this not working? And you have clear criteria of what you need to fix from there.
I agree. Perfect. Thanks for that. So a little bit brief about Privado. So Privado, as I said, is both a proactive and reactive software scanning solution. We'll scan anything your engineers have built to give you three key outcomes. Build that data flow inventory automatically. So you don't have to send questionnaires for that. You know from the source of truth on what's happening in your mobile app or website or APIs. Second is I like to think it in crawl, walk, run. So once you have your data flow maps, that's the crawl phase. Then you walk and set up some policies saying, hey, we want to make sure if something happens, alert us. Alert us when someone adds an SDK so we can act on it. So that's your programmatic governance. And finally, it's like pushing it to the engineers and the marketing team where you are in the run phase where you have almost like a DLP policy, wherein if someone basically switches on a tag, it creates an issue, prevents it, and the marketing team and development team or engineers actually fix it, and then they can go live, right? So you mature your privacy program with Privado across these three phases. What we really help you is three things. One is on the first side, we uncover all these data flows across the marketing tech stack. So think of the three things we spoke about: website, mobile app, and your CDPs. Privado scans all three, and we can first discover what data you collect, where it goes externally and internally. When it hits your CDP, then we can scan the CDP as well to say, hey, by the way, you sent your health data to CDP, and then the CDP actually, and you might have a agreement with them, but then in the CDP you are taking that health data and that goes to meta ads via the CDP or whatever the data flows is. So we cover end-to-end data flow for actually all cases, but for today's webinar for marketing across these three tech stack as well. The next thing once we have done is consent monitoring. So that's one thing we've seen as a big pain point, or at least the reason for a lot of CPRA, GDPR fines till date is the consent banner being misconfigured. I think UK just did like a top 50 publisher audit and sent some letters and notices. I see this as a constant problem because of a very simple reason that on your website, you have tools which can bring in more third parties, and you don't have any control around that in a banner, and that those tools are not synced. So you need something which is continuously monitoring and ideally gets kicked on the moment there is a website change, runs the scan, makes sure your CMP is working, and then it and brings in, opens up exact violation so you can fix it before you roll out your website to more people in the world. So that's the same for website. That's the same for mobile app as well. And to answer the question, does Privado work on a web or app or both? We actually work across. So both web, mobile app, CDPs, any software your engineers have written, proactively scanning them, and then reactively scanning your mobile app and website as well. So we cover both. I'm wondering, Nick, if you had if you experienced our consent monitoring and data flow part, if you have anything to share there as well.
Yeah, I think you need something that goes across both, and future platforms, right? It's not just web. It's just not just mobile apps. It's custom applications. If you're a company that builds custom software, we want to know what data is collected, where it's being shared. Maybe you're a processor, you make software for hospitals. Okay, well,
Yeah.
what data do we collect and how are we collecting it? And who's calling this data from our code repository? And hey, what's this MuleSoft API here? And where is that data going? So you need to be able to not only look across kind of the consumer facing pieces, but all points of engagement where software is being introduced to your customers. And I think that's what's so innovative here with kind of the Privado platform is it plugs into where code gets checked in. So anytime, a software engineer is writing their code, they check it into a central repository and let's scan that. So now we can see all code being checked in and identify what personal data is collected, what these flows are, and you're going to find stuff you didn't know was taking place. So you're not just limited to those two places. You need to just look at the ground floor of all of this and see what's taking place at the org.
Exactly. And that brings us to the last part, which is, again, crawl, walk, run. So you have the ability to find things, you fix things, and then you want to prevent things. And that's the advantage of proactive software code scanning, wherein right now in your org, when a new software change is introduced on your website, mobile app, any of your backend stuff, there are 4 or 5 security scanners that run. They're looking for secrets, they're looking for application security vulnerability. Why not have the same for privacy and make sure no privacy breaches happen in your production? You don't want to be informed 4 weeks later by some activist or a regulator who audited your website. You want to proactively catch that and prevent them from happening. So that's the guardrail. And that's like, true privacy by design, because you're not just relying on human input in an assessment, you're relying on constant checks as part of your product development lifecycle, saying, hey, we know whenever someone adds a new cookie or a SDK or a pixel, we can actually detect it, prevent it, and fix it before the change goes live. So that's like ultimate maturity. With that, I know we have like few minutes left, so feel free to start putting your questions. I'm going to quickly walk you through the Privado platform. I'm going to take only one example for the interest of time, which is an example of a mobile app. And because that's, I feel is theme of the season, that's where all the focus is going. So for example, so this is an example of an Android app that Privado has scanned. This is a health app, and the name suggests it's leaking something. We'll see what. But once we run the scan, Privado first builds an inventory of what is the third-party data flow diagram for this, even like what are the user forms for it. So this specific third party has about 14 SDKs integrated in it. And you can see some familiar names like Facebook Android SDK, Amplitude, Mixpanel, Ad Colony, Branch, AppsFlyer. Some of them have actually made it to the FTC notices of the fine, so you can actually correspond to them. And that gives you a starting point. We also like give you some extra information like permissions. I feel that's a big pain point on what is the sensitive permission our app collects, right? And this also becomes a problem in platform because someone configures a permission and they might not need it. And then what happens is the platform flags it and says we can't approve it because you're collecting too much data, or you didn't declare it in iOS privacy manifest report or whichever report you're building. Once you have that, the next thing in Privado is to go through the data element section. So this is the meat of the scan, which it is telling you, answering the question, what is the data that we collect, who we share it with, how do we process it, and every data element has a category, a risk sensitivity, and classification tags for different laws, GDPR, CPRA, Washington, My Health, My Data. That was a big thing this year as well. And then you can dig deep. So for example, if you want to know where your ad IDs are going, it's as simple as this. It will give you that visibility right away, saying there are actually all these vendors where our advertising identifiers go. AdMob, Firebase, Facebook, Mixpanel. And maybe that's fine. This is something you need. But when you go to a sensitive data like gender or illness or medical condition, that's a no-no. And it's going to all these 3 third parties, and that's a problem. So that's the first level of visibility you get. The same thing that you want to do next is SDK governance. That's a big theme too. That's what the California AG said. That's what the CNL is saying. That's what the FTC is saying is know about your SDKs and the data flows for SDKs. So for example, let's say your company uses Facebook SDK. First of all, you get a list of all SDKs. And then the next thing is, what is the data that my Facebook SDK is collecting? And this is the data that goes through your app to Facebook. And that's all automatic as well. Once you have your discovery, the data elements, the SDK inventory, Privado then takes it and looks at your public promises, and we have out of the box policies to say these are real privacy issues in your mobile app that you need to fix, and that's where you can send it to engineers. So for example, I'll pick 2 examples. One is where health data was going to Google Ads, and Privado created an privacy issue. Think of it as a real privacy risk, which is basically live. And if you see at the bottom, it gives a line-by-line code information on how the uh, issue really came about, like something like drug name along with pharmacy ID was tagged. That's something which is collecting, and it flows all the way to a line item, which is Google Ads. This is something is less for the privacy team, but for the engineering team, because when you want them to fix something, you want them to tell, here is the line of code, you need to fix this so we can go live. You can send this to Jira directly from Privado, and all of these things get handled automatically. So that's one example of a data flow, which is a leak that you want to fix. Another example of a privacy issue is around SDK governance. So in this case, someone added an SDK for the first time, as you can read the description. We discovered a new integration of Ad Colony. This is the first use, which means you need to check for a DPA, do a third-party risk assessment, maybe do an SDK governance assessment before this can go live. And Privado automatically does that for you. It creates the alert for privacy teams. At the same time, for the engineers, it also gives them an alert saying you need to speak to privacy. So if you see my screen, what you see is GitHub. This is where engineers spend all their day. This is something that privacy teams don't have access to. But when an engineer makes a mistake like this or something that violates your policy, we give them an alert saying you need to speak to your privacy team because there's a privacy issue. And that brings both engineering team, privacy team, marketing team at the same platform where they are all talking the same language. So that's a little bit fast track demo of Privado. I know we had like limited time. So if there are any questions around the platform, around SDK governance, feel free to, or the webinar in general, feel free to add them in the Q&A section and we'll pick it up. While that's happening, Nick, any thoughts? I know you've seen and worked with the Privado platform. What's your experience been?
Yeah, I think, look, big fan here. As long as you guys keep innovating and pushing this space, we'll keep recommending you to our clients. I think one thing you went through quickly is, but it's important, is the platform integrates to tools like Jira. So this is where engineers also live. So they live in Git repositories, but they also live in Jira, where they decide what action to take, what work are they going to do. Oftentimes they're not going to do anything unless it is a Jira ticket. And so if there's an issue, the tool will automatically create a ticket for an engineer to address. And maybe it's specific, hey, you got to fix this. Or maybe it's, hey, you need to go talk to someone about this, and route them to maybe your privacy SharePoint site to go create a request to go do something, create a PIA. And so it really lives where the engineers are. And now you're really embedded, and you have almost like a digital privacy engineer acting as an extension of the program, always looking, always listening, always aware, and providing feedback, and plugged in to the program here. So I think that's a super powerful capability for the platform, and that gives a lot of extension to the privacy folks here.
Awesome. Perfect. There's a question around the Privado open source code scanner. So yeah, we do have our like a basic version of Privado platform in code scan, which is open source. It was built for engineers to self-audit, and the starting point was to build Play Store data safety report. So that's the main use case there. You can run it. It has a lot of limitations, but you should be able to run it locally. It doesn't share any data with Privado. So if there's someone who's on the technical side, they can utilize it. Of course, we recommend more going the enterprise route, but yeah, we made that available for the larger community to at least start testing Privado before even speaking to us. A lot of our customers actually have done that as well, where they run the scan, they see something interesting and say, of course, this is not everything, hey, let's talk to us and figure out how can we implement the Privado enterprise platform as well. So thanks for asking that question. If there are any more questions, feel free to put in. Else, thanks everyone for joining in. Thanks, Nick, for doing this. I know, we've been speaking about this and hearing about this in conferences. So it was nice to, chat with you about this question. If there's any more questions about specific, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Nick on LinkedIn. We're both pretty public and writing about it. Nick, I love to follow your post about the real life challenges. So yeah, he's a great guy to follow and work with as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.